The Ford government's cancellation of the basic income pilot raised many eyebrows and more than a few hackles this summer. It was also not the only move the government has made on programs intended to help low-income Ontarians. To assess the state of the poverty reduction file in Ontario, let us welcome, in Windsor, Ontario via Skype, Lorraine Goddard. She is CEO of the United Way, Windsor, Essex County. And here in our studio, Sunil Johal, Policy Director at the Mowat Centre, Mike Perry, lawyer and social worker in the Kawartha Lakes region, and Jenny Roth, Senior Consultant at Crestview Strategy and a PC Party strategist. And we are delighted to welcome you three here in our studios. And Lorraine, good to have you via Skype from southwestern Ontario. Just to set up our discussion here, let's ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up these graphics here with some numbers to help us understand where things are at. Almost 5 million Canadians live off a low income. That is about 14% of the Canadian population. If we look at the province of Ontario, it's almost 2 million people that are living in so-called low-income conditions, and that is actually slightly higher than the national average. That's about almost 14.5%. Again, nearly 1.2 million Canadian children, that's 17% of Canadian children, live in a low-income household. These numbers all in 2015, incidentally. In Ontario, in 2016, 18.4% of children lived in low-income homes. And in Windsor, Ontario, where, Lorraine, we're going to start tonight, the highest rate of children living in low-income households in the province is in Windsor. I think we need to better understand why that is. Help us understand that.
Well, over the last 10 years, many of our good-paying jobs have left our community. At one time, we had a very thriving auto sector with Chrysler, Ford, and GM. GM is no longer in our community. Ford is about half the number of employees it was a decade ago. And Chrysler FCA continues to be strong. And then when you think about the impact that has had on the Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers, so there's been an elimination of a lot of good-paying jobs. Many of the jobs that have come into our community are just not paying at the same rate. And even the collective bargaining agreements, there are in many of these the big auto plants, two-tiered wage. So you have definitely a shift in our economy locally, and then you also combine that with people who have had the ability to move out of the community have done so into what we would say out in the county, leaving the core with many people who are not able to relocate. So it's a combination of a number of factors over a period of time that have contributed to this situation.
Gotcha. I think it's fair that many in the current government say that having a basic income is a disincentive for people to work. And that's one of the reasons why they canceled it. Do we have any empirical data on whether that's true?
Not really. I mean, and that was one of the purposes of the basic income pilot, was to gather more information about incentives to work, what would this type of intervention mean for people in the community. I mean, we've got the Mincome pilot from Saskatchewan, which was about 40 years ago. In Manitoba, and that was fairly limited in terms of what we could pull out of that. We've got a whole range of other experiments in other countries that are being undertaken, so hopefully we can pull some data and information from those pilots. But I mean, the challenge here for governments is that poverty is a really multidimensional, complex issue. There's not just one thing we can point out and say, well, if we do X, then we're going to address poverty in Ontario. And historically, those are the types of challenges and issues that governments are really stretched to try and address. Because, I mean, we look at things in government from a siloed perspective. Is this a housing issue? Is this a children youth services or childcare issue? But I mean, in reality, for people who are experiencing and living in poverty in Ontario and other jurisdictions, oftentimes they've got many of those issues that they're grappling with, and the services that we have from a government perspective to help them aren't well designed to support people facing multiple challenges.
Mike, let me put the same question to you. Sure. In your experience dealing with this issue, is having a guaranteed annual income a disincentive for people to work?
Steve, that myth has dated back literally hundreds of years to when basic income, the idea first arose in the UK. And, as Sunil was saying, there's no data, no empirical evidence that points to that. income, the experiment in Manitoba in the 70s. From what I understand from that research, what was able to be done, they found a slight decline in the labor force, but it corresponded to increases in high school graduations, in at least one parent being able to raise children at home, which contributes socially and to the economy. So this notion that, if we have a minimum basic income, a basic income, that we're all just going to, quit and sit on the couch every day, that's really not borne out in our everyday experiences.
Jenny, your view.
So I think that the reason that you elucidate that it disincentivizes work might be one of the reasons why the government canceled the income pilot. But I think there's a much bigger reason that we need to address, which is that it's really, 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 really expensive, to the point that it's prohibitive for, frankly, a government of any stripe to roll it out across the province. So, some people would say it could cost $17 billion to roll it out across the province. There's no government that would do that. The last government that was just lost in the election, the Liberals, there's no way they would have rolled it out across the province. It would have either added $17 billion to the deficit and the debt, or it would have you'd have to raise the HST the equivalent of 20 points. So it's not feasible. So should there be a pilot to explore whether a basic income works? Maybe those facts might be nice to have, but if there's no way that it would ever be rolled out under any circumstances of an elected government, then that's obviously not a useful solution for people.
I've heard government ministers bring out this line. It would cost $17 billion. We'd have to raise the GST by so much to do it. I don't know where that $17 billion figure comes from. And I bet nobody does. Where does it come from?
I think it comes from some extrapolation around what the current program costs.
But what if you didn't do the current program?
So
what if you did something less?
Well, obviously it was modeled. I mean, the pilot was modeled. The pilot, I think, was going to cost $150 million. So that in of itself is massive for just a really small community in what's a really, really big province. And I think, to go down this path is not fair to the people living in poverty today, who need an actual solution that is conceivable that this government could roll out. This government's also facing a bit of a fiscal mess from, you could argue, from the previous government. The province is in sort of dire straits. So if you're compassionate and you think, I want to help people in poverty today, you need to have a plan, and I think that's what the government's trying to undertake in, 100 days, that we're probably halfway through, to actually help those people in a way that's feasible today.
Let me read something here from John Malloy, who's a former Ontario cabinet minister. He's a Liberal cabinet minister, and he wrote this the other day in the Hamilton Spectator. Why is reform so difficult? Mainly because we can't agree on the purpose of social assistance. Is it about compassion? Is this about an incredibly wealthy society determining that everyone deserves a safe place to sleep, decent food, and the bare essentials of life? Or is this about creating opportunity? Should social assistance programs provide those struggling with the tools to break out of their situation, even if it requires a bit of tough love? As we never have that conversation, the system tries to do both, with poor results. We offer financial assistance to those in need, but in order to discourage applicants, make sure that it's not enough to make a difference. We offer programs and services to help people transition to employment, but maintain a whole raft of rules to catch cheaters and layabouts, which often act as a perverse disincentive to finding a job. Malloy goes on in that piece to say, when he was the Minister of Community and Social Services, he tried himself to sort of get his head around this conundrum, and of course, nobody wants to have the debate because that requires making a decision. Why can't we just sort of figure out what this is supposed to be all about?
Well, to me, that's one of the reasons the basic income was brought in as a pilot program, to get that research, to get that data. It's not simply nice to have. Literally, people's lives are depending on how we administer and roll out the most effective social programs possible. And, I have to go back to the issue of costs, Steve, since you brought it up. I mean, these days we seem to be caught in this very narrow, one-sided estimate of costs or examination of costs, financial cost only. Due diligence requires that we do a cost-benefit analysis, right? That's how we make decisions on a rational basis.
Spend more on basic income, but realize savings in healthcare, environment.
Well, we hear about this price tag, but what about the benefits? What about the fact that under the Manitoba study, 8 emergency room visits went down 8%. If you use the extrapolation to the Ontario healthcare budget, that's almost $4.5 billion in savings, the cost of ODSP alone. So when you look at both sides of the equation and take into the benefits. We're paying for it now too, Steve. I mean, last numbers I saw, $35 billion a year costing the system in things like law enforcement costs, healthcare costs, those things that we're paying right now.
Okay, let me get Ginny.
Taxpayer households.
Let me get Ginny.
Look, John Malloy makes a good point, and I think we should get into that. I think we need to also start to decouple the different things that social assistance is meant to do, because it's a few things. It's the compassionate desire that I think we all agree with, that a society must take care of those among us who cannot take care of themselves. It's also, I think, a deeply compassionate view that anyone who is able to do work, and that, by the way, that includes a lot of people who have what we call traditional disabilities. Anyone who is able to work should be given the best possible opportunity to do so, not even necessarily for the income, but also because of the sort of self-fulfillment that brings.
Let me get Lorraine back on this. Lorraine, do people who work in the social services sector, and I'm, for lack of a better expression, going to put you there, does everybody, is there consensus on what social assistance is supposed to be about?
Yeah, I think that our experience in speaking with people who rely on this assistance, it is, I think the attitude is we are trying to be compassionate and help you, but all of the rules and regulations really counter that philosophy. And there is just not enough resources that actually help lift people. It actually works against them. It keeps them in poverty. I agree with the other panelists that poverty is very complex. It, if you're trying to help people get into the workforce, a single mom, and they don't have transportation, they don't have a safe home, they don't have public transportation that can get them to the job. I mean, these are all barriers that are preventing people from moving forward. So we can talk about the cost of giving families a basic income, but we should also be looking at what would it cost to actually, like we have a dire lack of affordable housing in all of our communities pretty much in this province. What's cost to actually provide those supports for people? I mean, it's all connected.
Mike, you're suing the government.
Yes.
You're not only opposed, you're going to court.
Right.
What are you doing?
Well, we've tried everything else and take no joy in this, but when governments go astray and make these kinds of decisions, then that's what the courts are there for ultimately, to provide justice, and we'll be seeking that through the legal system.
What's the gist of the lawsuit?
Sure. Well, there's a class action that's been commenced with 4 representative plaintiffs from Lindsay, 4 recipients, who...
Lindsay was one of the pilot project areas.
That's right. You were up in Lindsay, and we talked about that at the time.
There. Yeah.
That's right.
Hamilton, Lindsay, and Thunder Bay, I guess, was the third.
Right. And so this class action is essentially asserting that there was an agreement. There was an agreement on this research study. The fact that it was a 3-year research study, and it gets into, we talked about this before the show. You can agree with basic income or not. What's happened now is really about how this government, any government, treats people, right? And so just being, having the program being taken away the way it was midterm, that's what our class action is going to be based on. We also have an application for judicial review coming up on the decision itself.
So Neil, you are not here as a politician or as a lawyer, and notwithstanding that, I'm going to ask you a political legal question, which is, do you find it problematic that after promising during the election campaign that the government wouldn't cancel this basic income pilot, that it would let it run its course, that they in fact came in, did cancel it, and now have no plans at the moment to replace it?
That is both a political and a legal
there you
question.
Go.
So I mean, I think from my perspective, just as a policy observer, that has some challenges. If I'm somebody who was under the expectation that I would have this runway to do things, and whether that's go back to school or make changes in my in how I live my life, I think it's reasonable to assume that essentially a contract was entered into with the government, and I can make those decisions. Whether the government agrees with a basic income pilot or not, it's up to them to terminate the program or decide we don't want to get the research results out of it. But I do think there's a fairness element here that if I were somebody who were enrolled in the program, I'd be very upset with how
I
this
want to
would
hear
end.
Ginny on this because they promised not to kill it, and they killed it.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things that the government has been Premier has been transparent about, saying, I said something during the election, and now that I've learned more about it, I just can't do what I said I was going to do. So on Bala Falls, for example, on this pilot. And I think part of the reason he can do that politically is because he got elected on a commitment to dig into what was viewed broadly by the public, I think, as a bit of a mess. Do some fact-finding to start, and then make a bit of an assessment. Some of that fact-finding is ongoing, but I think on a couple things, whether it's Bala Falls, whether it's the basic income pilot, the assessment was, and the due diligence was, the cost is just too high, and the dire straits of the province's financial mess are just too great to not sever this right away.
Lorraine, do you find that a reasonable argument that, I didn't know as much before, now I'm Premier, I know more now, we can't do it? We don't want to leave people with false hope that it's going to be there at the end of the 3-year period. Let's cancel it now and figure out something else.
I think there's value in terms of the research and the learning that would have been derived from it. I'm, not an expert to say that basic income is the answer, but we really don't know the impacts it would have in terms of how it would actually lift people up and put them in a position to be self-sufficient, and then the savings that would be realized in all of these other very expensive services that we're funding, the healthcare, the criminal justice system, all of that. I mean, we just won't have that opportunity to learn now. And I also feel that the folks that have signed up, I mean, many of them are in a much worse predicament as a result. When I speak to my colleagues in those communities, the folks that were signed up and, entered into new housing leases and different things like that, that has all been stripped away. So if we want to talk about compassion and hope, that doesn't seem very compassionate, nor does it feel very hopeful for them.
Well, we quoted a former Liberal cabinet minister earlier. Let me now quote a former Conservative chief of staff to both the Prime Minister and a Premier and a former Conservative senator. Here's Hugh Segal, who said, looking at the cost of the pilot project is fair enough, but frankly, simplistic. We know that poverty is a perfect predictor of poor health and early hospitalization, bad educational outcomes, substance abuse, and problems with the police, all of which cost Ontario billions. The vast majority of the guests of Her Majesty in our prisons come from the 10% of our fellow Ontarians who live below the poverty line. So, if the pilot had revealed that healthcare usage was diminished, wellness improved, workplace participation increased, educational achievement enhanced, and policing challenges diluted, how much would that have been worth? Do the Ford Nation Conservatives even care to find out? I leave that last question with you, Jenny. Do the Ford Nation Conservatives even care to find out?
So I think the Ford Nation Conservatives care about those outcomes. I think that, I hate to beat a dead horse, we can't afford it. We can't afford to roll out this program across the province. Having said that, do the Ford Nation Conservatives care, does Doug Ford care about poverty and the poor outcomes for society that Hugh Segal enumerates? Of course they do. But his solution is very different. His solution is to create more jobs through a variety of different mechanisms. We can talk about lowering taxes, making Ontario open for business in a variety of different ways that he's been pretty clear about. It's improving transportation options. It's making life more affordable. I mean, often people who are low income still have to drive around because they don't live near good transportation options. Making their gas tax cheaper, making the price of the pump cheaper for them. Doug Ford's approach to affordability and quality of life is different from Hugh Segal's, but that doesn't make it any less legitimate. I
know, Mike, that you would obviously like to see the basic income pilot reinstated.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen. So what's your second best choice?
Well, we're not out of the woods yet, Steve. I mean, we have an application for judicial review as well to ask the courts to overturn the decision. But, as an Ontarian and as a taxpayer, we can completely afford basic income. If we look at the benefit side of the analysis, right? All the cost savings that you just mentioned would ensue. For years, we've been hearing, can we not have political decisions and policymakers make some decisions that save money longer term? And that's what the basic income program was about, getting research and data on.
The politics of it, though, are tricky because the expenditures are what happen up front and the savings tend to happen down the road.
Right.
So that's a problem if you're presenting a budget next March.
People I've heard from for years have actually wanted our leaders, our political leaders, to do just that, to make these shorter-term decisions for long-term savings and move forward on that basis. Is it affordable? Absolutely. If you look at how the benefit side could be costed, and that's something that we really have to take into account. You were your first quotation there around, we've heard a bit about compassion. To me, this isn't about compassion. It's about economic justice. It's about taking away the barriers so we can all participate and reach our potential. It's about all of us if we fall on hard times. This isn't an us and them about the poor and the rest of us. This is how we all treat each other and how we're able to take care of each other and ourselves if we fall on hard times in this precarious economy.
Sunil, is it reasonable to infer that, yes, there would be a large outlay at the beginning that would cost something, but that the savings in all of the things Hugh Segal just enumerated could significantly help reduce the costs? You're an analyst. What do you think?
That's definitely possible. I mean, but again, a lot of those savings would be longer term, and you've exactly outlined that's not a political winner for governments saying, well, don't worry, in 15 or 20 years, we'll see the benefits of this approach, which is why I almost think this is a bit of a distraction. What I'd rather see the focus on right now, rather than basic income, yes or no, is why aren't we investing more in skills training for workers in Ontario and in Canada? We're far below other industrialized countries in terms of our investments there. If we think the nature of work is changing, more people are going to need help transitioning into the digital economy, why aren't we investing more there? Why aren't we investing more in affordable housing so that somebody who is challenged to access a job because they can't find a good place to live that's close to work, has that opportunity. So, I mean, basic income is one option, but there are a whole range of other issues we could and should be looking at in terms of skills training, childcare, affordable housing, reforms to the employment insurance system so that the federal government, we don't have fewer than 30% of unemployed Ontarians eligible for EI, which is the current state of affairs. That's a problem too, and that has nothing to do with social assistance reform. So I would hate to see the conversation consumed entirely by the basic income issue. I think it's important we talk about it, but there are a whole range of other social supports that we need to look at improving for those Ontarians who haven't seen their paycheck increase in 20 years or who are engaged in precarious forms of employment.
I will take your advice on that then, and then go back to Windsor and Lorraine Goddard and ask her, when Lisa MacLeod, the minister responsible for this file, stood up in the legislature and announced she was canceling the basic income pilot, she also said, give me 100 days, I'm going to study this, and we're going to come up with something different, and she hopes better. What are your hopes and expectations for that process?
Well, I would agree with Sunil that it needs to be a multi-prong approach. We do need to have a plan to increase affordable housing. We do need public transportation. We do need more child care. We do need, even food insecurity is a growing problem in our community. I mean, it's not, and skills training and preparing people, particularly our young people, for our future economy. I mean, I hope that they come up with a plan that is comprehensive and actually helps to lift people up versus just giving them the bare minimum to keep them in the same place that they are today.
Ginny, when you're dealing with something as complicated as this, is it really reasonable to say, I'm canceling this that has been going on for a year and a half, and I can come up with something different and better in 100 days?
I think that's been this government's approach to a lot of things, is to act quickly, because I think they have a mandate to do that. People in Ontario, Sunil might know better than I, how many studies there have been to examine social assistance and how we can do better. I think there have been a few over the last decade or so, and there have been studies. I mean, they've been taken months, if not years, to report back on. Very little action, I think, coming out of them. So I don't think people have a big appetite for that. I think they want to see action. I think there's already been some action taken in, if you're a nerd and you care about how these things work like I do, Lisa MacLeod's actually responsible for a number of different ministries that were previously separate. She now has accountability for all those ministries.
She's got youth, she's got community and social services.
Absolutely. A lot of those live under her now. And I think there will be inevitably, and certain there already has been, some consolidation. So that does two things. A, it finds some efficiencies so that you're not paying, six-figure salaried public sector employees necessarily for service delivery. It also takes away some of the silos that Sunil was talking about and allows you to have a bit more of a holistic approach to service delivery. So I think that's already in process. And I think it'll be changes like that, re-envisioning how these things are organized in government that you'll hear about when the 100 days is up. It might not be a final plan for how all of these things will be delivered. I think you'll probably see some consideration around whether organizations like Lorraine's and others might be better at delivering assistance to people on the ground than government itself. I think that probably would take up the Doug Ford ethos. So I don't know what's coming, but I think this government's acted pretty quickly so far on a lot of issues, and I don't think we should be concerned about the timeline.
Sunil.
And I think that's great. There's room for action, but I would just beg any government, look at the evidence of what works in this space. And there are so many programs in Canada, from the United States, from Europe, where we know these types of interventions work. They actually result in a payback to the public purse.
For example?
So Families First in Canada, or At Home Chez Soi, where we're focusing on what are the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness. We give them a caseworker. We help them navigate the system. We don't just say, here, fill out a bunch of forms, figure it out yourself. The results on those programs are tremendous. We see huge returns on investment. And the same thing in terms of programs helping people with mental illness access the job market, for example. There are a whole range of programs around the world where we can point to them and say, we don't need to study them. Let's just implement the same approach. We have integrated caseworkers. We have case managers working with people. Sometimes it's going to take a little longer to work with somebody who may be experiencing multiple challenges, but the payback for that in the long run, or even the medium term, is going to be significant. So I would say to any government, look, you don't need to study a lot of these things any further. Just look at what works, implement it in Ontario, and watch the good results flow in.
I know your first choice is to have your lawsuit succeed and have the basic income pilot returned, but we are hearing some other ideas around the table here. And do you think it's possible that after the 100 days is up, that this government could come forward with something that is different and adequate to the task?
Well, I have to say, Steve, I mean, the irony is not lost on your viewers, I'm sure, or people across the province. The government says, and I agree, that everyone agrees, the current system wasn't working very well. We had to try something new. Here we were trying something new under a pilot project research study, and then it was just scrapped. And this has had a terrible impact on people across the province, a horrible impact on people across the province. So we'll wait and see. 100 days is not a lot of time, and we saw this movie before in the 90s, and it didn't really end that well for working people, for people living in poverty at the time, and I'm not optimistic. What we really want is the basic income program to continue to its fruition and learn and take the evaluation from there.
Is there something specific that you, either in your political past, you used to work at Queen's Park, can look at and say, you know what, I like this idea, this could work, I hope they're going to do this?
Yes.
What is it?
Social impact bonds.
What is that?
So Sunil talked about return on investment. Traditionally, government has not been good at finding ROI. They're not built to create ROI. They're not good at service delivery in a way that speaks to objectives. Social impact bonds mean sort of leveraging the success of the private sector and corporations at what they're in a lot of ways best at, which is ROI and return on investment, and incentivizing them to use money from the public purse to create programs and deliver against them to return on that investment based on whatever objectives you want. Quality of life being, I think, the driving force for social projects. So I'm glad you asked. I don't know if the government's considering that, but I think it's something that would be consistent with Doug Ford's ideology and the mandate he was elected on.
Lorraine, number one, have you ever heard of those? And number two, if you have, what do you think of the idea?
Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with social impact bonds, and that's really an emerging approach. I personally, from our community, we're looking into how could we access that opportunity. Our community is coming together to really get under the hood of this child poverty issue and looking to create strategies at a neighborhood level that would follow a child and support him or her from birth right through a career, so a cradle-to-career strategy where there would be an evaluation framework implemented, shared data, and a continuous improvement loop that would really help us to track our progress. And we believe that this strategy would really align well with a social impact bond opportunity.
Sunil, you ever heard of these things or studied them?
Yeah, we've looked at those. I mean, social impact bonds are one of a range of different innovative approaches to government transformation. We're seeing governments look at outcomes-based approaches to funding, for example. So instead of funding you on how many bums are you putting in seats in the school system, we're going to fund school boards that actually meet EQAO scores at a higher level more. So it's kind of incentivizing performance, for example. Integrated approaches to service delivery, another one. So instead of having 3 or 4 different government departments work with the same client, let's integrate what they do so there's one touch point and one approach. So, I mean, in the past 15 to 20 years, we've seen a revolution in terms of public sector management and innovation. The question is, when are governments like Ontario, the federal government, going to look at some of these approaches and really move towards transforming how government services are delivered? Because in many cases, we're seeing services delivered the same way in 2018 as they were in 1958 or 1948. And quite honestly, with all the changes we've seen in terms of society, all the opportunities we have to leverage technology now, that's not good enough. And if we're competing in a global economy, the public sectors that innovate, that look at these new approaches to financing, to service delivery, to data, to measurement, to evaluation are going to be the ones that succeed in attracting investment, creating those new jobs of the future. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for us in Ontario and in Canada to be those government leaders in terms of innovation, in terms of delivering services differently, but it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of transformation across a whole range of different sectors.
Okay. There's one new idea we've left out there, social impact bonds. I want to thank all of you for coming into TVO tonight, helping us out with this. Lorraine, good to have you on the line via Skype.
Thank you.
In southwestern Ontario. You're the CEO of United Way, Windsor, Essex County. Mike Perry is the Lindsay area lawyer and social worker. He's going to court against this government. Sunil Johal is the policy director for the Mowat Centre, and Ginny Roth with Crestview Strategy and a former PC Party strategist as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.